A couple of hours ago, depending on when you are watching this video, a blue post has been made public with PvP nerfs, hotfixes, mainly addressing healers' mana. And of course this is aimed strictly at PvP, so if you're not planning on doing any arenas or battlegrounds, then you don't need to worry. If you've been watching last week's Arena World Championship, you would have seen resto druids, elemental shamans, boomkins, and unholy death knights, or what some people would call meta. As fun as it is to see cool specs performing well in PvP, the one-sided strength they showed was a bit too much after a few matches, and it's not like they've been performing well above all others just recently. This trend has been going on steadily ever since 8.1 rolled out with the changes. And this brings us to today's hotfixes. It's no surprise to anyone that resto druids are currently the top dog for healers. Their kit aside, the most overwhelming thing they add is the mana, especially the mana preservation that they are capable of. On this topic, Discipline Priest was heavily nerfed in 8.1, which is not surprising considering how strong it was in 8.0, except for the fact that the nerfs seem to be too big. And you know Disc Priests are not performing well when Hydra is learning Resto Druid. And now we come to what was hotfixed. Mana regeneration was nerfed for healers across the board. Resto Druids were hit the hardest with a 55% reduction. I suppose this was to be expected seeing how they performed in the recent AWC games and simply how they perform right now. Everybody else except Discipline Priest has had a 50% reduction to mana regeneration, while Discipline received a 45%. And because all of this will tie in nicely in a minute, off healers, balance druids, feral druids, and elemental shamans, to be more exact, have also had their mana regeneration reduced by 35%. Earlier this year, red paladins were similarly hit with this change, and now everyone else seems to fall in line. All of these changes are more than just bringing healers to a more balanced point. All of these changes speak to a new meta. Of course, right now we are speculating, but it's a pretty safe speculation if you ask me. It's clear that Blizzard doesn't like the way arenas are played out at the moment. Most matches, at least arguably balanced matches in terms of skills of both teams, tend to drag out for quite a bit. As an avid esports fan and competitive gaming in general, I really enjoy watching PvP in esports, and from a viewer's perspective, I do agree with Blizzard on this change. Last week we saw insane dampening numbers, and not just in one match, but in a fair number of them. For the amount of PvP that I do, I personally enjoy the healer role the most. I find it the most interesting one in a 3v3 scenario, and however little this may mean on the long run, as a healer I have troubles against maybe 2 DPS specs if I ever had to 1v1 someone in arena. Healers are a bit too strong, and the viewing experience can suffer. Matches lasting this long because healers can keep people alive for a long time can be fun. Don't get me wrong, I played Disc Priest for a while and I have mad respect for Hydra and Zuniaki. The amount of skill these guys have is unparalleled, and it was very painful to see them pressured and being beaten the way they were last week. And from my untrained eye, it seems to have a lot to do with them being way before their Resto Druid or Resto Shaman counterpart. And even if they were to say switch healers, which at least Hydra has been seen to stream some Resto Druid practice, these long games cannot be good for the boys either. In a group stage where you have to have multiple best of 3s culminating in a potential best of 5s can be insanely draining if you go over 50% dampening every time. And although it was fun for me to see them struggle and display amazing skill dealing with low mana situations, after a couple of hours seeing certain matches play out similarly, it became a bit boring. When I saw Moldiva play his Destro Warlock, it was a really good change of pace. The amount of pressure he was putting was so palpable that I was on the edge of my seat. That was cool. That's what I think we should have more of. And it's hard to have a lot of that type of match when there's an arguably visible stagnation of the flow of the fights. Personally, I think these changes could be good. It's still early to be 100%, but faster, more intense matches not only are more fun to watch, but should be less tiresome for players if they're to play out a full day. There's still a lot to see, how the changes will play out, and realistically we'll probably know in about a week or so. The initial perception though of the changes is a bit awkward. Even though the numbers weren't as brutal for Disc, they still seem to be worse than before at first glance. It looks like they might need to buff them a bit more. And on the same line, the first impression is that resto druids still seems to be on top. Plus it helps that resto druids have an easier time to get out of combat and drink, which is something a lot of people will have to start doing, changing the meta into a more hectic one where healers want to drink and DPSers want to get them back into combat. And all of this mana reduction or regeneration reduction makes Mistweaver's Cocoon a bit more awkward even. The really short cooldown it already has feels like it's going to be even more impactful. Cocoon gives a target a shield and increases the heal over time strength that target gets. And since the HOTS are usually more mana efficient, Cocoon will probably rise really high. And I'm not sure if that's too great, seeing as how the strength of it was what made Mistweaver super hard to contest with earlier in the patch. Marcelian stated fairly enough, "Hey man, what about what you guys said, man? Buff other classes instead of nerfing the ones that are outperforming." And yeah, the devs used to say that. They used to say that they prefer to buff other classes rather than nerf what is strong. And I really agree with this philosophy. I still stand by my thoughts on the 50-70% dampening games and that they should be rarer than they are now. But burying specs too hard might just make arenas be a 3 DPS fiesta, with hybrids probably being a must and the only reliable way of sustaining the team. Among the hotfixes, resto druids got another nerf to Nourish, the PvP talent which has its mana cost increased by 30%. So I'm not sure how many of you that thought about resto druids also thought about castable heals that heal for a big chunk. For me, resto druids meant HOTS here, HOTS there, and an occasional synergy of all the HOTS exploding into a big heal. But seeing people cast back-to-back Nourish in the AWC and topping people off made me take another look at their class and make sure they were indeed druids and not just some shaman bullshit. And hey, resto druids won't be able to cast back-to-back Nourishes anymore. But is it enough? And the last nerf addressed was to Neurotoxin. As far as I know, this rogue assassination talent used to be bugged a lot, locking people out of their abilities for way longer than intended. I'm not sure if the bug was fixed or not, but it looks like the nerf is made to reduce the effectiveness of the bug. Am I wrong? What do you guys think? We're really curious to know how you've been faring in arenas with your healer of choice, either if you've been playing it or if your friend has been playing it. How is the healer meta at the moment? Also, if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. We post PvP and PvE related content, and there's probably already something out there on our channel that you might find interesting, with more coming in the future. I've been Flame, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you next time.